That's fantastic. So anyway, just for 10
Good afternoon, Rotarians, and welcome
so nice
to today's meeting of the June 2nd Rotary Club of Louisville. I'm Jean West, owner, producer, Faces West Productions, president of the club, and Paul Harris Fellow. Hey everybody, so good to see everybody in person. Welcome back. Yeah, it's good to have you all. So, be heading off tomorrow to the International Convention. Who's going with me? Couple folks? Yeah, good. To provide our invocation is Casey Meyer, president of the Waterfront Botanical Gardens.
Thanks, President Jean. So for all of you, please join me in a moment of reflection. This is a quote from Wendell Berry, The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound of fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. That was beautiful. Now to lead us in the pledge before we test is human faith.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you. You may be seated, Rotarians. It is our pleasure to always welcome guests. So, Rotarians, please check this time, step to the mic, introduce yourself first, then the guests. And guests, please stand to be recognized when your name is called.
Hello, everybody. Delane Taylor, Executive Director of the club. I think I'm the only one that has guests today. So I have one special person to introduce, longtime friend Tracy Peck. She is going to be helping out. Amanda has many more hours than one person can handle right now through the agency that we've hired her from. And so Tracy is going to be stepping in. She works at a private school, so she's off for the summer. So another smiling face to greet you as you come in. So, all right, and I have two guests, Carlos Hernandez Ocampo. You guys, I am horrible with accents, so I won't even try to pronounce names right. Y'all just remember I'm from Texas, and we don't talk any other way. Carlos is the managing partner of Emergence Law. He is a U.S. Navy veteran. He is an artist. He speaks 5 languages. He's a very interesting person, so you want to know Carlos, and he's going to be a Rotarian very soon, right, Carlos? And the other guest is Pierre Ngaro, and he is, I think, a native Louisvillian who lived in California for the last 41 years, and the Sergeant at Arms for, I believe, the Pasadena Rotary Club, Robert Lyons, told him that he needs to connect with the local Rotary Club. So welcome, Pierre.
Welcome both guests, and we hope that you will become Rotarians, and you guys are sitting at the table with the right person right there in the middle of you, Craig Sherman, and he's going to be at the Wettest Rotary table for any more information that you may need. Now, it is time to recognize some Rotarians in the spotlight. We had a fantastic evening last Thursday at the Louisville Central Community Center. WDRB covered the ribbon cutting as Rotarian Kevin Fields. Where are you, Kevin? Kevin Fields, yes. Launched the new Business Intelligence Center at the LCC Minority Business Incubator. I had the opportunity to speak, as did Rotarian Sharon Riemann, who was representing SCORE on behalf of Tom Crimmins, who was traveling. and Rotarian Nation Tribune, the founder of Melanie Marketplace. Many of the vendors were set up in the atrium, and a number of us did some shopping. Read all about it in Business First, and you can look at pictures and a recording of the launch portion on our Louisville Rotary Club Facebook page. Okie dokie, now it is time for Occasion Culture class. So where's Luke Smith? Luke Smith went vacationing in my part of the country. And I think he missed out on some of these. As summer starts, so many of you head to Florida or the Carolinas for a beach. Why? Look at what Cajun country has to offer. There is Rutherford Beach in Creole, Louisiana. It's on the Gulf, warm water, great fishing. There's Fontainebleau State Park on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain. I bet many of you have been to New Orleans and have never been to Lake Pontchartrain, right? It has a beach, state park, the whole thing. Grand Isle, Louisiana. A couple of weeks ago I was in Grand Isle, Vermont. Who knew there were two? But I grew up going to Grand Isle. We had a camp, or a cabin is what you guys call it, on the island. North Beach in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And Holly Beach, which we call the Cajun Riviera. It is near Cameron, Louisiana. And do we have the last slide? We're not joking. All right, that's the Cajun Riviera. So sometimes, look up these, many of them have campsites, kind of like this, but others have lodges. So they're wonderful beaches, great seafood, etc. You said it. Say that again. Say it again. Yeah, go ahead. You said all elevated? Oh, yeah. All right. He was being funny. All right. Now I'd like to invite Mike Cool, past president, major donor, and chair of the Rotary Foundation Committee, and much more, to the podium for his very special recognition.
Okay, thank you, Jean. I'm pleased to take this opportunity to honor Kevin and Linda Wardell, who have generously contributed to the Rotary Foundation, and in doing so have achieved major donor status. Because of their dedication to our foundation, we honor them today with Major Donor Level 1 recognition. Thank you, Kevin and Linda, for this support. So much good begins with your generosity. You give to others not knowing their stories, their faces, or even their names. In doing so, you demonstrate through your generous act that all fellow human beings are worthy of our compassion. Your act of kindness is a seed of peace that will yield returns from not only the community served by your generosity, but from Rotary as a premier foundation and organization. You are among a dedicated and select group of humanitarians who have committed themselves to serving others. Major donors change the lives of children, young people, adults, committees, communities, and the world to which we all belong. Would you please come forward now and accept our congratulations? Your gift inspires others to give, not just of their treasure, but of their time and their talent. In recognition of your investment in the Rotary Foundation, wonderful projects and programs, I present this crystal and major donor pin on behalf of the Foundation trustees. Picture.
Mike, it's always been a great pleasure for us to give to the Rotary Foundation, and I should say that this doesn't happen at one time or something. I think I gave my first gift and became my first Paul Harris Fellow 32 years ago when I was a member of the Park Ridge Rotary Club, which is next door to O'Hare Airport. So it takes a long time. Then when I was president in 2014-15, I joined the Paul Harris Society, when we commit to give $1,000 a year, and you do that a few years, and suddenly you hit $10,000. Kind of happens quick. So thanks all, it's a great cause and we really feel good about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin and Linda. What an inspiration to all of us. And now I'd like to invite Tom Crimmins, Paul Harris Fellow Tons 4 and Club Director, to the podium to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, President Jean. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Jose Gaztambide. He's the founder and CEO of GoodMaps. Jose formerly served as Chief Operating Officer of Interact, and he previously structured and launched social impact bond and pay for success contracts at Qualified Ventures in Washington, D.C. He was also formerly a consultant at McKinsey & Company, where he served clients in a wide variety of industries and helped them with due diligence, merger integration, and organizational design. A real breadth of topics in business. We need to have him volunteer with our efforts with the Louisville Central Community Center. Jose has an MBA from Cornell and was a Roy H. Park Leadership Fellow and served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Honduras, focusing on business development and supporting local entrepreneurs. Jose began his career at CEMEX USA as a strategic planning analyst. He has swum the English Channel and Alcatraz, not in the same day, I don't think. He did it without a wetsuit, though, and that you're going to be the first one to bust out of jail from Alcatraz. I think that's what always kept people in there. He's traveled cross-country on a self-supporting cycling trip. He lives here in Louisville with his wife, Catherine, his son, Emiliano, and their dog, Magi. Was he a gift? Oh, okay. And he's also a avid baseball fan. Please welcome Jose.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. I am going to try to keep this light and casual. Please feel free to interrupt. I'm also going to do a fair bit of asking for a raising of hands throughout the course of this presentation, and I'm not afraid to volunteer folks in the audience. So, as was mentioned earlier, I am the CEO of a company that is called GoodMaps. And to really understand GoodMaps, you have to understand the world of blindness and the world of mapping and geospatial intelligence. Who here is familiar with the American Printing House for the blind? Yeah, oh, I love it. You leave Louisville and not quite so many hands go up. For those not terribly familiar with the American Printing House, they have been around for 170 years, which is really unbelievable to think about. And most of the Braille that is consumed in this country is produced 7 minutes away at the American Printing House. About 8 or 9 years ago, the American Printing House welcomed a new CEO by the name of Craig Medard. And one of the things that Craig set out to do was to figure out how can APH play a role in the issues of people who are blind and visually impaired beyond Braille and beyond education. And in talking to the community and talking to people who are blind and visually impaired throughout this country, what they identified as the single largest remaining issue for people who are blind and low vision is independent navigation. If I'm a blind person, how do I get around the hospital where I get my care? How do I make my way to the desk of the office building where I am employed? How do I make my way through the airport as I'm on my way to visit family? And so they set out to solve that issue. How can we put tools in the hands of people who are blind and low vision to help them get around, to get them, help them get around independently? What they did was create a mobile application that lived on smartphones. And that application would provide them with information on where they were and what was around them. And it worked great outdoors. They could walk down the street, they could be informed as they were approaching coffee shops, they could make their way into the door of that building. But once they entered that building, that navigation journey and that independence disappeared. And the reason for that, and what is really at the core of what GoodMaps is trying to do, the reason for what I just described is because we have mapped the outdoors many, many, many times over. Every single person here who has a phone or has a laptop can access mapping data for anywhere in the outdoor world in many different formats. But the indoors remains completely unmapped. We have no maps of the indoors. And to give you an idea of the breadth and the scale of what I mean, there are about 400,000 buildings across the entirety of the world that have digital maps associated with them. The same kind of maps that you would experience if you opened up your Google Maps or your Apple Maps for the outdoors. Only 400,000 throughout the entire world have that for an indoor space. There are 6.5 million commercial buildings in the United States alone. We are nowhere when it comes to mapping the indoors. And the impact is actually fairly broad, both from a social perspective, but also from a financial and an economic perspective. I welcomed my son into the world about 2.5 years ago, and we were in the hospital for about 5 days. And every single day we were at that hospital, I got lost. And I showed up to the cafeteria when it wasn't open, and I showed up to the wrong wing of the hospital, and I had to go in search of my in-laws. There is real value in helping anybody, whether blind or not, be able to get around spaces, and in particular, really complicated spaces. Now that's true for people like us who are in this room. Now imagine that you're a firefighter, and you are showing up at the scene of a fire, and you have got to go in and find people, or you've got to go in and figure out where the fire is happening and how to control that fire. Because you don't have any kind of building information, because you have no idea where that fire is happening, because you have no idea where people are congregated, your job is fundamentally less safe, and your ability to do your job once you enter that building is fundamentally harder and less safe. What if we could put the same maps that we put in front of people who are blind, in front of firefighters, in front of SWAT teams, in front of EMS? If anybody here has read the after-action report for the Parklands, Florida shooting, over half of those who perished in that particular school shooting died because the EMS didn't know where they were going, didn't know where to find the people. They bled out and they didn't have to. Geospatial data, the ability to put the right mapping information in front of the right people when they need it, is not just about blind people getting around. It's not just about me saving 15 minutes when I'm getting lost in front of a hospital. It is about making people's lives fundamentally safer in all kinds of environments. And so that is the hypothesis behind GoodMaps. How do we map the indoors? How do we take these giant black holes of data that exist in all of the buildings that we enter on a day-to-day basis, and how do we bring that data to life? How do we map it? How do we put it in front of the people who need it, whether you're blind, whether you're in a wheelchair, whether you're like Jose and get lost when you're walking around your kitchen, or whether you're a firefighter or a SWAT team member who's responding to the scene of an emergency. And so that fundamental truth, we have not mapped the indoors, and there's a lot of really great stuff that we can do if we map the indoors, is at the heart of why GoodMaps exists, why we do what we do, and why we set out on this journey about 3 years ago. I'm not going to be very heavy on slides, by the way. They're going to be more supplementary to some of the things that I'm talking about. But for anybody curious about our origin, some of the underlying beliefs that drive the way that we do our business, and some of our technology, you can see it up here. Some of you might be asking yourselves, why have we not mapped the indoors? If we saw so much value in mapping the outdoors, and if everybody has access to those outdoor maps, then why haven't we done the same thing for our indoor spaces? And the answer is really 3 things. It's many things, but there are 3 primary things. The first one is mapping an indoor space is actually not that easy. You could map an outdoor space through primarily satellite imagery, and then somebody going down a car with some expensive hardware, and they can do an entire city in a day. Mapping indoor spaces is significantly more difficult, or at least it was up until about 2 or 3 years ago. So that's the first thing we need to understand. The mapping process for an indoor space is not easy. Number 2, GPS does not work indoors. And so when you pull up your Apple Maps or your Google Maps, there's a little blue dot that tells you where you are on that map, and that blue dot is coming from GPS and the satellites that provide global positioning. That doesn't make its way through building materials. And so when I'm in a hospital, I might have a map, but I have no way to identify where I am in that map. And that's really fundamental to the value of a map. And so being able to identify a person or an asset within the map that has been created has historically been one of the things that has really made mapping difficult. The third one is that street level data doesn't pose that much of a security risk, right? Like we all walk down the streets and anybody can do it, and it's not that hard to do. But naturally people get very fussy about their data when it's their office building, or it is their hospital, or it is their school, and you've got people inside and security concerns. Historically, the mapping platforms that have existed are all open source. If anybody's familiar with Wikipedia, anybody can edit Wikipedia, anybody can access Wikipedia. That's not acceptable when it comes to maps. Number one, because anybody has access to the data, and number two, because the quality of the data suffers when it becomes open source, and we all kind of know that inherently. And so those are the three things that GoodMaps set out to solve, and the issues that we thought really stood in the way of what we wanted to do, which was to map the indoor world. I'm going to call for a show of hands. Who has heard about LiDAR? LIDAR. Wonderful, wonderful. Good show of hands. Whoop.
It'll come back on in a second.
Wonderful. So LiDAR is a technology, if you're familiar with Tesla and the movement towards self-driving autonomous vehicles, all of these cars have little LiDAR sensors, and you can think of them as laser emitters. And what they're doing is blasting out hundreds of thousands of points of light and then measuring when those points of light hit an object and then return that information over to the machine, in this case the car. That same technology is what we are utilizing to map indoor spaces, and so I'll point your attention over the slides that we have here. The leftmost image here is one of our mappers who has grabbed a mobile LiDAR backpack, put it on their back, and they walk through the space. If any of you remember the Ghostbusters movie, it looks very similar to something in the Ghostbusters backpack. The output of that walk and of that scan is what you're seeing in the middle image here. It's extremely accurate, down to about, depending on the device you use, 3.5 to 5 millimeters of accuracy. We were able to generate this LiDAR point cloud in about 18 minutes. Compare the same process in the traditional mapping method, where people are walking around, they're pointing laser scanners, they're writing 7 feet from one wall to the other wall. It can take a day or more to produce the exact same thing that we produced here in about 18 minutes. And so when I told you that mapping was way too difficult in the indoor setting, mobile LiDAR has significantly decreased the amount of time that it actually takes to create those maps that we rely on. So that's part number one of the problem that we solved. And then the third most image here on the right is this LiDAR scan turned into a map that a person can engage with when they enter the space. So scan, point cloud, map that a person can use and search and figure out where it is that they're trying to go. So LiDAR has played an enormous role in being able to decrease the speed and increase the amount of maps that we can create on a daily basis. This is an example of a LiDAR point cloud to the system that we are migrating to. And I mention this because when I first put this in front of people, they asked me, isn't that just a picture? And it's not, it's a LiDAR point cloud. It's a collection of tens of millions of small colorized points. And why that is so powerful is because we're able to capture a level of detail and a level of granularity of the buildings that we enter that opens up a number of use cases and opens up just a world of possibilities. I told you earlier that one of the really big bottlenecks was the ability to identify where a person is within that space because GPS doesn't work indoors. What GoodMaps has done to address that is create an artificial intelligence system. And when we walk through a space and collect this LiDAR point cloud and collect our images, we take all of that data and what we do is identify features within that space. And so if we look over here at the imagery, I guess I can't really point at this thing, but at the very top there, you would see the whiteboard, and you would see the windows, and you would see the chairs, and any number of things that are very specific to that particular space and to that particular image. What we then do is extract all of those features and all of those images, which we can only identify because of the quality of the LiDAR that we're dealing with here. And we're able to create, you can think of it as a fingerprint, which is unique to each individual space. And when a person is walking through that space and they're trying to identify where we are, we can scan for that fingerprint, identify where you are to within less than a half meter of accuracy, and return your blue dot position, the same thing that you get from GPS, but in an indoor space. And we can do that in less than a second, because it's all cloud-based services. So what we've effectively managed to do is not just mimic GPS in indoor space, but improve on what GPS can do and bring that into environments that range from retail environments like Walmart, the NHS and VA sites. We have 19 train stations in the UK mapped. We have the #1 provider of accessible navigation in public transport. And we're able to do that because of this technology, because of this LiDAR, and because we're able to bring artificial intelligence to this cutting edge technology and solve some of the issues that have historically prevented indoor mapping from becoming more prevalent. This is another example of one of the point clouds. It's a top-down view. This is actually our working space. You can even identify some of the members of the team who are working here. This entire scan was about a 2.5-minute process. So a very fast way to collect really accurate, really fantastic data. So I mentioned that we were born out of the American Printing House with a very specific mission, which is help people who are blind navigate their spaces independently. The hard reality is that this is a country that has a long ways to go in terms of its prioritization of accessibility. And when you compare ADA to its equivalent legislation throughout the world, we are decades and decades behind. ADA doesn't even begin to cover digital accessibility. Right? When ADA was put into place, people didn't even have internet at home. How could possibly imagine the world that we live in today? And so the question that we asked ourselves was, how do we get all of this technology in all of the spaces we want it to be in a country where people don't always have the budgets and don't always have the ability to invest in accessibility? And the answer was, these maps have value that extend well beyond blindness and low vision. And there's all kinds of value that we can extract and all kinds of business cases that we can make for mapping indoor spaces. And somebody might not say yes because of the accessibility component. They might say yes for a different reason. But by them saying yes, we're able to bring accessibility into that menu. And so I want to spend a second talking about some of the things that we are working on and some of the things that will be released over the next year or so that are really going to help drive that use case. And it might not be focused on accessibility, but it still serves accessibility because it allows the technology to be more venues. Anybody heard of augmented or mixed reality in here? I see a few hands going up. The idea of augmented or mixed reality, and they're effectively the same thing, but the idea is you take what is real and then you overlay something digital on top of it. And so this leftmost image is something that we are working on. The blue dot is the technology that's that augmented reality component, and everything around the blue stripe is what your camera would see when you're walking through an airport. So imagine that you walk into an airport, you're not familiar with it, you've got to get to gate A16, you don't know where gate A16 is. You pull up your phone, you tell them I'm trying to get to gate A16, and all of a sudden your path is highlighted in front of you, but only for you. Right? That naturally has no relevance to somebody who's blind or low vision. It's got a lot of relevance for me and to the people in this room. And so this is one of the things that we'll be rolling out by the end of this year to be able to provide value using the exact same underlying technology to an audience outside of people who are blind and low vision. I talked already about emergency response, firefighter, SWAT team, EMS. That's obviously a very complicated and nuanced approach, but there's a lot of people really excited about this. And we're in discussions to partner with a company that does gunshot identification. And what they do really well is put these really long-lasting, effectively microphones in spaces. And when a gunshot is fired in the vicinity of that microphone, they're able to pick up the caliber and a really accurate position for where that gun was fired, and they can feed that to first responders. And the problem is, as we talked about before, none of these spaces are mapped. And so what do you do when somebody tells you, hey, a gunshot has been fired? I can't tell you where it is. I can't tell you how to navigate to it. I don't know what the closest spot is. I don't know what that is relative to the people who are in that space, right? There's a lot of information that's missing. And so by combining what people are doing with gunshot identification with what we're doing with mapping and navigation, we can get people to the scene significantly faster and significantly safer. And then on the right here, you see medical equipment. The average hospital in this country will waste about $2.5 million per year because they lose equipment that is on wheels, or they spend a bunch of time having their people look around for that equipment that is on wheels. If any of you have ever worked in a hospital setting, you know that stuff gets lost all the time, and that all of the technology that is radio frequency based doesn't work in hospital settings because there's all kinds of signals that are flying around all over the place. And so a Bluetooth beacon might tell you that something is in one room, it turns out it's 2 floors away. Why? Because there's all kinds of traffic and the signals interrupt each other. Because our approach is completely camera-based and completely digital, all you need is a data connection. And so we can identify and track in real time where assets are on a hospital floor and help a nurse identify where the machine she's looking for is, help procurement say, we've got 10 of these machines, 8 of them haven't moved in 2 months, so we really need 10, we can probably right-size that. Help track where patients are, particularly patients that might have dementia and wander, and you want to be able to get triggered when they leave a particular space. All of these things that are possible and are direct bottom line improvements in a healthcare setting. We are, hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow, going to finalize a location within the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, to start piloting some of these ideas in a live environment with their innovation team. And so we might think of blindness and accessibility as something that is corporate social responsibility, not a priority for a lot of business units, but the things that you can do with the same technology that allows somebody who's blind to get around independently unlock millions and millions of dollars worth of direct savings, direct cost savings, and we're out to prove that. That is the end of my presentation. I thank you all so much for your time and attention, and I think we'll do Q&A.
Rotarians, make your way to the mic for questions. That is yours. My question is, how much does all this cost to you? No, you should be talking. Are we good, Kevin? Yeah, all right. How much does it cost to implement?
Yeah, it's all based on the size of the space. These are all machine learning models. They have to ingest data and then produce functional models. We are in conversations to do all of the Walmart stores in Canada, about 408 stores. Each store will cost somewhere in the neighborhood of about $12,000 to $15,000 to actually perform the scan, and then another $5,000 to $6,000 per year to just support the machine learning models and all the maintenance and technology that goes behind it. And those stores range between 150,000 square feet and 180,000 square feet.
And the other question I have is, I guess I watched way too many spy movies. How do you handle security? This is wonderful for the good guys, but how do you keep this kind of technology out of the hands of the bad guys? Who has access to them?
In a lot of ways, it's the most important question because it's the first question that people ask before they buy. And there's 2 answers to it. The first one is this idea of role-based permissions. So a client has access to their maps, they log onto our online portal, and they're able to see their maps. And for every building, for every floor, for every room, for every point that exists within that map, they have the ability to set the security profile. So for example, they might choose to make the space public, and that means that anybody that has access to our software can see that space, they can navigate to it. They might choose to make that available only to their engineering team, because who needs to know where the wall sockets are? Nobody but the engineers, right? Or they might choose to say, we only want to show that to first responders, or we want to show it to anybody. And then the way that our software works is everybody who feeds into that data that we have only has access to whatever it is that the client has decided that they want to share. That's the first version of that question. The second one is that we do it all on premises, and it's all owned by the client themselves. And so if you're familiar with edge computing or edge devices or anything that's non-cloud based, we can just hand over the software and put it on an edge device, and it's controlled by the people who are on premises. And some combination of those two tends to get about 95% of our clients comfortable with the approach.
My name is Larry Sloan. I'm retired from being an independent salesman. I'm on the committee, or it's a facilitator committee, for age-friendly Louisville, where aging in place is a big goal. And we have been talking not only about what it's like to age in place if you're blind or deaf or have another disability, perhaps even cognitive issues. And there's a new office, a new staffed office in Kentucky for dementia-friendly, for people that are having dementia issues, which a lot of people are having, it seems like these days. I'm sure I don't know if it's any worse than it ever has been, but maybe it's just because I'm aging, I'm hearing more about it. But the idea is, it seems like your software here has some sort of usefulness for people not only who are blind, but who have maybe cognitive issues of all ages or are experiencing some dementia. And I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's a really great question. Number one, you're absolutely right. It does have value, and we got a lot of questions about it. In fact, in the months leading up to when COVID really kind of shut everything down, we had a lot of conversations going on with senior care centers, and for obvious reasons, those conversations stopped in March of 2020, and we're still working to get them picking back up. But I think the hypothesis that this technology has value to people beyond who are blind, and specifically to people with dementia or other kind of neurodiverse needs, is spot on, and we hear it all the time. And I think what's really interesting is how diverse the term neurodiverse really is. We have clients out in Europe who run transit networks. And for them, the largest ask that they get is for highly anxious travelers. You can imagine walking into a train station with tens of thousands of people and you've never been in there. There's all kinds of announcements going on. That's hard for any of us. It's particularly hard for people who struggle with really right tail anxiety. And so how do you build a navigation experience for those people prior to them even arriving on site, and then supplement it with information that happens on site is really important. That is not our area of expertise, but what we do is partner with people who really specialize with those populations and then tailor the experience according to what they tell us. We are starting with highly anxious travelers because it's a little bit easier to understand what the needs are and a little bit more adjacent to the technology as it exists today. But there's all kinds of additional populations that will follow.
Hi, Susan Zepeda, retired CEO of the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. It seems to me that pre-pandemic, I had learned that the Kentucky Center, before their fire, and the airport had navigational devices for the blind. Is that you all?
I'm not familiar with the Kentucky Center. The airport had, I mentioned earlier in our story that the American Printing House started off with this effort years before we were even founded. And the airport was one of the locations that they supported. That version of the technology that APH owned was reliant on a technology that's called Bluetooth, or Bluetooth beacons, and these little things about the size of your phone that you put all over the wall. And then they emit signals, and then whoever is navigating receives those signals, and they use it to get around where they're going. Bluetooth is not a positioning technology. It's a data transfer technology. And people were very crafty and very, I think, resourceful in using that technology to identify where people are indoors, because it's all they had. But now that we are able to, A, get more accurate, and B, do that without having to code an entire space with these Bluetooth beacons, the airport, just last week actually, or no, a week and a half ago, announced and went live with a new version of this technology. Yeah, so they were kind of the precursor to what we're doing now.
My next follow-up question, if I could, is how do you deal with a workplace that's intentionally designed to be modular and modified? I mean, it's not just moving the whiteboard from one side of the room to the other, but conceivably reconfiguring rooms. How does that work with your system?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mentioned earlier that there is this online portal that clients log onto. And so if Mike's office becomes Steve's office, then you just log in, a couple clicks later, you make that change. If a room changes and a sofa was on the north wall and now it's on the east wall, you can just go in and click and drag. If something changes on a much more foundational level, you knock down walls, you build a new wing in the hospital, then we probably have to go in there and spend a few minutes rescanning.
Hi, President G. Great conversation this morning. I was just at the doctor's this morning, and sure enough, there was a man blind trying to navigate a 90-degree vestibule and ended up in the elevator and had to backtrack. And so I think really on point with the needs. Chris Monzo, Sandbox Design Architect. Curious about what you think the applications of this technology are for architecture and engineering.
I'd be curious to get your thoughts. It's interesting. People often ask us, why can't I just give you my CAD drawings? And the answer is because you probably haven't looked at those CAD drawings since the building went up. Number one, they weren't as accurate as you need them to be. The difference between a 10-meter hallway and a 12-meter hallway is significant when a person is trying to navigate. And number two, the space has changed in really big ways. And so originally we actually tried to ingest CAD drawings, and we found that we spend more time having to go back and figure out, like, why is this also wrong, than in just starting from scratch. We have had conversations with some construction firms who are interested in performing the scans, not for the sake of navigation, but in order to capture the state of a construction project at a moment in time. And so to go from breaking ground to, we've got 20% of it built, to, the electricity is up, to the piping is up, right? All of these stages. There's value there in then being able to say, hey, look, on this date, this scan was taken, and I can prove to you that this work was done in accordance with the agreement of the work of the construction project. So I think there's some relevance there. And I think finally, building information management systems are increasingly popular. The problem with those is that the audience is primarily architects and GIS engineers. And a building manager or a person like me trying to get through that space, or a visitor, there's no way for them to ingest that information. And so it's increasingly for us about how do we make sure that those systems are talking to each other, so that we're not having a person have to enter the same data in two different places, or have data that conflicts with each other. Nobody ever went through to make sure Mike's office was now Steve's office. And that's just about data integration.
Morning, afternoon, President. Neville Blake, two questions for you. I've been mentioning sort of how the blind can access it, and you had the example of sort of the first one for the airport where somebody sees the blue line. Well, how does a blind person, you've been saying they can access it, but how do they actually do it? I heard that example. And then number two, have you thought about installing sort of a real-time version, sort of putting this LiDAR in the train station or whatever, so it's constantly updating, so the person doesn't have to change when the sofa needs to change or moves and all that kind of stuff. So how does a person use it in a real-time application?
Thank you for those questions. I want to make sure that I understand the first question. Are you asking what is the experience like for that person, or how are they even made aware that the technology is available?
How do they experience it? So that they can't see the blue line, so what, is there audio communication that's saying, walk straight, take a left? I mean, how do they engage with the technology?
Yeah. So great question. For somebody who's familiar with the app, the experience is something like this. You walk into whatever building it is that you're going to. We're able to identify that you're in that building. We ask you to hold up your phone. And then that process that I described of comparing what the phone is looking at with the fingerprint of the space happens, at which point we're able to say, okay, I know the XYZ coordinates of where you are. I announce to the person where they are, and then they can do one of two things. They can either walk around, in which case we'll announce to them whatever it is that they're walking by, right? Points of interest. In other words, say the bathroom is 12 feet to your right, the smash burger is 40 feet to your left. Or they can pinpoint a destination. I want to go to Dr. Smith's office, and then we will give them turn-by-turn audio directions on how to get there. So we'll say your turn is approaching on the left in 10 feet, in 5 feet, turn to the left. Right? And they will get that kind of audio-based description until they reach their destination. Your second question, I'm sorry, please remember.
You go into the train station and you walk it.
Okay.
What if you install a real-time version of the LiDAR technology, so that it's first you get a subscription period out of that, everybody's loves. And then two, it's constantly being updated, so people know what's going on, the movement of the couches and chairs.
Like Uber, for instance. So you get real time the cars.
Yes, correct.
The car's location as it's coming to.
Correct, but it's real time for
It's real time.
the configuration of these chairs, these tables changes in an hour.
Yeah.
Okay, so somebody comes in, but there's a LiDAR up there, that will be recorded. Anybody who accesses the software, they'll know that these tables are gone. You don't have to physically update it.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, just fantastic question. The deep dark secret of anybody who creates a map is that the moment you create that map, it is now a historical document, right? You captured something that was, right, not something that is. And so how do you create a map, how do you make a map go from a 3D to a 4D, with that fourth dimension being time? Right now, we are able to do some very light object detection, obstacle detection when a person is walking through the space. So we can tell them, hey, you're approaching a crowd, you're going to have to veer off, or hey, there's something in your way. But I think what you're highlighting is a much more real, I don't say problem, but opportunity. Intel, who's
I'll take a percentage.
So I mentioned that LiDAR is the technology that is predominantly working outdoors and with autonomous vehicles. The benefit in that is that people are spending a lot of time and energy and research on LiDAR, and it's getting a lot cheaper and a lot smaller, which is delightful. When we first bought some of our LiDAR backpacks about almost 3 years ago, we were looking at $80,000, $90,000, $95,000 pieces of equipment. Those same exact models are now down to like 45 or 50K. I mean, we are witnessing what technology does, which is it gets smaller, it gets cheaper, it gets better. The downside is that all of the research, when it comes to LiDAR, is predominantly in the outdoor space, and it's almost entirely about cars and things that cars run into, and being able to identify those in real time and then changing somebody's navigation during in accordance with that. And so we find ourselves in a place where the LiDAR that we use to create those point clouds is a lot better, but our ability to identify the things that LiDAR is picking up hasn't actually progressed much in the last 2 or 3 years. We recently received an investment from a local venture capital firm called Future Labs, and their hypothesis is they either bring companies like us to MIT, or they invest in very early stage companies that are coming out of MIT. And so we have begun conversations with the computer science and artificial intelligence lab at MIT to do exactly what you described. How do we put something, whether it's a LiDAR or whether it's just a video feed, that is constantly identifying changes in the environment and reflecting those in real time, or something approximating real time. And it's, I think, the next challenge to really make these maps come to life is exactly what you described. How do we turn these maps into 4D, not 3D images?
Thank you, President Jean, and thank you, Jose, for all this information. I think we're all getting a lot out of it. My name is Casey Mayer, President and CEO of Waterfront Botanical Gardens. We're in conversations with you guys in the American Printing House to map the buildings and the outdoor spaces of Botanical Gardens. You mentioned that there are a lot of outdoor spaces that are already mapped. I'd like to know if there are outdoor spaces in Louisville that are mapped, and how we can access that information.
Mapped for the sake of accessible navigation?
Yeah, but if we wanted to see.
Yeah, actually, University of Louisville has allowed us to use them as a bit of a testing ground, particularly for what we call campus settings. And for us, campus is anywhere where the user wants to go from inside of a building to inside of another building, and they've got to walk some kind of connective tissue. And so we'd be happy to show you how that works in a campus setting at the University of Louisville. And I think we have the student campus, the Student Activity Center, and then the Speed Art Museum mapped. And so we have that journey mapped.
And I believe I've seen a really cool video that you guys created on what you do, so I would encourage everybody to find that. I don't know if that's on the American Printing House website or how to find that video.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that would be on the GoodMaps website, goodmaps.com. We've got all the videos and articles.
Good afternoon, Charles with Jumper Company. I'm a restoration contractor, and we do some commercial work. And before we find a wall, we go through pictures through pre-construction, and they use a system called Matterport for 3D pictures, and that's what we use for our company for during our process of reconstruction. Is this kind of similar to the LiDAR, or is that putting Matterport out of obsolete?
First of all, great question. Matterport is really specifically focused on imagery and what they call digital twinning. The idea that I at my computer should be able to walk through a space that is a digital twin of whatever area it is that they have scanned. And it's really predominantly focused, not entirely, but predominantly, or at least historically focused on real estate. Right? The idea of walking through a house before I go through the hassle of driving 45 minutes and making my schedule with my real estate agent. There is some overlap in what we do, but I would say that they do things, their data is incomplete when it comes to creating actual maps the way that we expect to experience maps, and they in no way address this issue of like, where are you within that map? We do not necessarily try to replicate what they do, which is to say, they're measuring at a very small unit of accuracy the space between this doorway and that doorway, or here is a product. Now you get to double click on that product, figure out how to shop for it, figure out how it fits into your space. And so there's a fair bit of overlap, and we do run into them fairly often and know them well. I would say that there is a healthy respect and a pretty clear delineation between what they do and what we do. In other words, somebody looking for accessible navigation would never call them, and somebody looking for digital twinning of retail spaces would never call us.
Hello, Delene Taylor. I downloaded the GoodMaps Outdoor app, which is available on the App Store right now. I don't know, is it on both Android and Apple?
Yes,
Okay.
that's right.
So it tells me where I'm at, what direction, as I turn, it changes the direction that I'm facing. It tells me the intersection, Mockingbird Valley is 0.2 miles, and the nearest point of interest is the River House. So, I mean, it's really interesting. If you want to kind of play with it, you can download the GoodMaps app on your phone. I also wanted to ask you, so you've talked about a lot of different applications of this technology. How prepared are you to scale up if you were to have the money to do all, if you were to have the investors to do all of those different applications, is that even a possibility, and are there still options to invest?
Welcome to the question that keeps me up at night. We have been really fortunate to find champions like Intel and like Walmart and a number of other kind of high-profile companies that believe in what we're doing, both from a technology perspective and a mission perspective. Sometimes we're doing a museum and it takes us a day and it's fairly easy and the complexity is not that high. But our hope is in January to announce that we're doing all of the Walmart stores in Canada, 408 stores. We have a list of 10 things that we consider to be our home run slams. They include the NHS, we're going to be doing a VA hospital down in Southern California, the entirety of the newly nationalized United Kingdom transit network, which is 3,000 train stations throughout the United Kingdom. We're really fortunate to have gone from a place a couple of years ago of like, what do we do? What's our product? What's our technology? Does it work? Who's going to buy this? How do we price it? To, okay, we've got clients, we've got 7 figures in revenue, we've got some really high profile instances of how this works. Now, how do I do 400 Walmarts in a year? I mean, we're talking about doubling or tripling the size of our team within the next 7 or 8 months. Things that work when there's 12 of you don't work when there's 24 and don't work when there's 100. That's what keeps me up at night. That's what we're actively working on. How many people do we have to go hire? Who are they? Are they in Louisville? Do we have to open up offices elsewhere? How much can we offshore? Are our human resources policies and processes in any kind of way where they can scale? How do we identify people? How do we maintain our culture? Right, we've got a really small, cohesive culture because it's 15 people that have been going at this for 3 years. How do we maintain that when I no longer interview every person who walks through the door? I no longer get my stamp of approval on every person I hire. Those are the challenges of growing a company, right? From something small to something bigger, and we're not going to get it all right, but we'll do our best.
Last question, Rick.
My name is Rick Harned. I'm retired from an IT career that's quite obsolete now because I've been gone 12 years. Delene really introduced the question. It hadn't been specifically said, but it sounded like you are headquartered here in Louisville.
Yes, that's right.
And you do have huge growth expectation or possibilities throughout the world. And I wanted to know, are the educational institutions in Louisville geared toward helping provide the skills that you're going to be needing in part to hire here, but you're also going to be needing to look elsewhere and maybe brings folks to Louisville?
A second question that keeps me up at night. How long do I have? The answer is, generally speaking, yes. Software developers in particular are really increasing quality in the area. The problem that companies like mine have had over the last couple of years is we are no longer competing with local companies for the talent. We are now competing against Facebook and Amazon and Google. They are hiring people in Kentucky. And what that's doing is great for the individuals who live here because they are now able to get what is more of a national salary for some of this talent. But it means companies like us who have relied on talent that's below the national average from a cost perspective are now fighting against the Googles and the Facebooks. To give you an idea, we hired somebody a year ago. They were at market for Louisville. 1 year later, they're 35% below market in 1 year. We've lost people to 75% raises in less than a year. I mean, the battle for talent is as fierce as we have seen, and it's only going to get worse.
Really quickly, you swim the English Channel. Really quickly, can you describe your conditioning?
We trained about 10 hours a day, 6 hours of that in the water, a few hours of kind of mental preparation, an hour of dry land exercises, and then an hour where our coaches would put us in this giant above ground pool for an hour, water to our necks, and just pour ice in the pool. And every minute they would blow the whistle, and we would have to submerge ourselves for 20 seconds, come back up, catch our breath for 40 seconds, and then do it again.
4 hours. Because I said, isn't it cold? He said, well, by the time we got it, it was like war from the condition. Thank you so much. Back up for announcements, please.
Next week's meeting on June 9th will feature Russ Cox, President and CEO of Norton Healthcare, and our own Amy Luttrell, President and CEO of Goodwill of Kentucky. Paul Harris, Society member and a Vice Chair of the Rotary Foundation Committee, very active. The menu will be hot browns, and there will be a vegetarian option available at your request. Please RSVP, like every other meeting, by noon Monday, or scan that little code on the table. Please note that there will be not a Zoom option for that meeting. Another honor flight for Kentucky and Southern Indiana area. Veterans of Korea and Vietnam will be returning to Louisville International Airport tonight, around 10 p.m. And this is a treat if you haven't done this. Our own Sophia Fisher will participate. We plan to join and cheer them on, because it's nothing like we're giving up all yourself to the government, to the Army and protecting us, and they'd like to see you there. Guess what? There's something special that's happening. You heard the noise just now a minute ago. June 12th is a special time. It's guaranteed to be a special evening from 4 to 7:30 at my home. The Entertainment Committee has selected my home to be the place where you can all come together and have fun. One of the magical ingredients about our club is that it's the people we have in our club. So share the fun. Come to I've heard so many people say I want to come, but you know what? We all procrastinate. I gotta get tables and chairs and everything else, and I gotta get food. So please get that reservation in. And don't forget, if your spouse is concerned about, am I gonna know anybody? You can bring guests if you want. More the merrier. What are you gonna see? Unique architecture. It looks like a country Victorian on the outside. What is it inside? It's contemporary. Gardening, one of my passions. I love it. You'll see some great featured art out there, and water fountains, pool, everything else. And I got a lot of unusual stuff that you can see. And say, oh, would you believe what that? Well, you can say that. I don't mind. But the magical ingredient is you. So come, enjoy it. It's a summer fling, spring fling. All right. So bottom line is, we have the food, we have entertainment, we have everything you can think of. But don't forget to check out Sparks for more detail about these events, important announcements, and this week's birthday celebration. Thank you.
All right, how can we resist? Thank you all for coming so much. This meeting is adjourned.